The Garden of Forgotten Petals. In the fading hours of twilight, when the kingdom's sky lay cloaked in hues of indigo and gold, Prince Elric stood at the edge of his balcony, gazing out over a landscape that seemed vast yet suffocating. The palace sprawled below, its towers and spires gleaming coldly in the dimming light. But his eyes were fixed beyond the walls, drawn to the shadowed forest that stretched endlessly towards the horizon. There, the air seemed alive, stirring with a restlessness that mirrored his own, a yearning for something unnamed. Elric had always been a child of questions. As a boy, he had roamed the marble halls seeking answers in books, scrolls, and the wisdom of the old scholars. Yet, for all their stories of valor and victory, of gods and kings, none had offered the solace he sought. Now, as a young man, his heart burned with the quiet ache of something missing. The court dismissed it as youthful folly, but Elric felt it as a void, a whisper that grew louder in the stillness of night. Tonight, that whisper called to him not from within, but from the woods. It was faint, a voice carried by the wind. No, in the wind. It wove through the air like a melody half forgotten, and it spoke his name. Elric. It wasn't a command or a plea. It was an invitation, haunting and irresistible. He didn't question his steps as he descended the stone staircase and slipped through the gates of the palace. He carried no torch, for the moon hung low and full, its light pooling like molten silver upon the ground. His boots crunched softly on the frost-laden grass as he moved closer to the forest's edge. Each step drew him deeper into the hush of the woods, where the world seemed to hold its breath. The trees here were ancient, their trunks gnarled and knotted, their branches intertwining above to form a canopy that whispered secrets to the night sky. The air was thick with the scent of earth and pine, yet there was something sweeter beneath it, faint as the trace of a dream. It wrapped around him, pulling him further. It was then that Elric saw it, a feather lying amidst the roots of an oak. It shimmered faintly, a pale light radiating from within its delicate barbs, as though the moon itself had woven it. He knelt, his gloved hand trembling as he reached for it. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a chill raced through him. Not of cold, but of a sensation deeper and older, like the turning of a forgotten key in a long locked door. The wind rose, circling him in sudden ferocity. Elric, it murmured again, and this time it carried with it a voice, not just sound, but presence. The boy prince turned, his breath visible in the sharp air, and for an instant he thought he saw a shape within the shifting fog. It was slender and graceful, its outline soft and glowing. But as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, leaving only the whisper to guide him deeper into the trees. "Who are you?" Elric asked aloud, his voice steady despite the quivering in his chest. There was no reply, only the rustle of leaves and the ever-present wind, yet the feather pulsed faintly in his hand, a beacon he could not ignore. The path ahead grew narrower, the trees leaning closer as if to watch his passage. The further he walked, the more the woods changed. The air grew warmer, tinged with a strange luminescence that seemed to come from nowhere. A faint glow outlined the moss on the ground, the leaves overhead, the very edges of his cloak. Time itself seemed to stretch, each step both heavy and light, as if the world around him were holding its breath. Then, in the distance, Elric saw it, a grove unlike any he had known. The trees surrounding it bore bark that shimmered like starlight, and the air was filled with a soundless hum that vibrated in his chest. At the grove's center, a figure stood waiting, its silhouette outlined by a silver glow. Elric's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer, the feather in his hand trembling as if it recognized its owner. The figure turned, its wings catching the faintest flicker of light. They were unlike anything Elric had ever seen, translucent and delicate, yet radiating a power that seemed unearthly. The figure was not human, nor wholly of this world. "Prince Elric," the voice said, a melody wrapped in the shape of words. "You have come." And in that moment, Elric knew his life was no longer his own. Something greater, something ancient, had claimed him. Elric stood frozen, the figure before him a vision of impossible beauty and quiet power. Her skin shimmered faintly, as if woven from moonlight, and her hair cascaded like liquid silver. But it was her wings that held his gaze, translucent and intricate, each vein like a thread of light tracing a map of forgotten constellations. She seemed both part of the grove and apart from it, as though the very air around her bent to her presence. "You spoke my name," Elric said, his voice quieter than he intended, as though afraid to disturb the delicate silence. The figure tilted her head, her eyes, iridescent pools of shifting colour, holding his own. "I am Lirien," she said, her voice like a song half remembered. "You heard my call, though it was not meant for you." "Then for whom?" Elric asked, clutching the feather in his hand as though it were an anchor. "For those who have forgotten," Lirien replied. "For those who have abandoned the stories that once bound them to this world. The feather you carry is a fragment of what I once was. It sought one who might listen." Elric frowned, the weight of her words pressing against him. "I do not understand," he admitted. Though even as he spoke, a strange sense of familiarity stirred within him, as if he had heard these words long ago in a dream. Lirien stepped closer, her bare feet gliding over the moss-covered ground as though untouched by the weight of the earth. "The world forgets," she said, her tone heavy with sorrow. "It forgets the bonds that give it life, the stories woven by love and loss, joy and despair. In that forgetting, it withers." Elric's fingers tightened around the feather. What does that have to do with me? You are a seeker, Lirien said simply. Your heart carries questions, and where there are questions, there is the seed of remembrance. But beware, Prince Elric. Curiosity is both a blessing and a burden. Her words stirred something deep within him, a yearning he could not name. If I carry this seed of remembrance, then guide me. Show me what it is I must remember. Lirien's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. Very well, Prince of Restless Hearts. Follow me and tread carefully, for the path we walk is not made of stone but of stories. She turned, her wings catching the faint glow of the grove, and began to move through the trees. Elric hesitated only for a moment before following, drawn by an invisible thread that seemed to pull him forward. The forest grew denser as they walked, the air heavy with a sweetness that Elric couldn't place. Shadows danced along the ground, but there was no source for their flickering light. Lirien moved with an otherworldly grace, her form flickering at the edges as though she were part shadow herself. "Where are we going?" Elric asked, his voice breaking the silence. "To a place forgotten by all but a few," Lirien said without turning. "A place where the world's stories have been gathered, preserved in the only way they can be." Her words only deepened Elric's curiosity, and he quickened his pace to keep up. The trees began to thin, their gnarled branches giving way to something more ordered. In the distance, he saw the outline of a gate, its frame twisted with vines that shimmered faintly in the moonlight. As they approached, the gate seemed to recognize Lirien, its vines parting soundlessly to reveal what lay beyond. Elric's breath caught in his throat. Before him stretched a garden unlike any he had ever seen. Flowers of every shape and colour bloomed in abundance, their petals glowing softly as though lit from within. Each flower seemed alive, its light pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The air was filled with a quiet hum, a sound that Elric felt more than heard, resonating deep within his chest. "This is the Garden of Forgotten Petals," Lirien said, her voice reverent. "Here, every flower holds the memory of a love lost to time. Each petal is a story, preserved so that it might never truly vanish." Elric stepped forward, his eyes wide with wonder. "Why have I never heard of this place?" "Because the world has chosen to forget it," Lirien said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "It is easier to forget than to carry the weight of loss. But in forgetting, we lose something far greater." Elric turned to her, his heart pounding. "And why am I here?" Lirien's gaze softened, and for the first time, Elric thought he saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Because this garden is dying, Prince. Its stories are fading, and with them, the magic they carry. Unless its purpose can be restored, it will vanish, and with it, the last remnants of love's forgotten stories." Elric felt the weight of her words settle over him. What must I do? Lirien smiled faintly. That, my dear prince, is a question only the garden can answer. Come, the heart of its mystery awaits. And with that, she turned and led him deeper into the garden, where the petals seemed to glow brighter, their whispers growing louder, as if the stories within them had awoken at his presence. The Garden of Forgotten Petals unfolded like a dream made tangible, a place that seemed to hover just beyond the realm of understanding. Elric followed Lirien through winding paths, bordered by blooms that pulsed with a faint inner light. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers, sweet, heady, and tinged with something Elric couldn't quite place, as if memory itself had a fragrance. Each flower seemed alive, its petals whispering in a language just beyond comprehension. Elric leaned closer to one, a delicate blossom with translucent petals that shimmered like the surface of a still lake under moonlight. As his breath touched it, the whisper grew louder, resolving into something almost audible. A woman's voice, soft and distant, spoke of a love lost in the tides of war, of promises broken under crimson skies. Elric drew back, his heart trembling. "These are voices," he said, his words faltering. "Not voices," Lirien corrected gently. "Stories. Each petal holds the essence of a love that the world has forgotten. Some are tragic, others tender, but all are bound by the same thread, the longing to be remembered." She extended her hand toward a nearby flower, its deep crimson petals curling like flames. As her fingers brushed it, the garden seemed to grow still, the whispers around them dimming. A vivid image bloomed in Elric's mind. Two lovers meeting in secret under the cover of night, their laughter and tears entwined with the rhythm of the stars. Then, as quickly as it came, the vision faded, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. "This is what the garden preserves," Lirien said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "But it is dying. The stories are fading, their light growing dimmer with each passing day. Soon, even the petals will crumble into nothingness, and the magic of this place will be lost forever." Elric looked around, noticing for the first time that some of the flowers had already withered. Their petals, once vibrant, now lay scattered on the ground like ashes. A cold dread settled in his chest. Why is this happening? Lirien turned to him, her iridescent eyes catching the faint light of the garden. Because the world no longer remembers the value of love stories. It forgets too quickly, discarding the bonds that once wove its fabric. The garden survives on remembrance, and without it, its magic cannot endure. Elric's gaze fell to the feather still clutched in his hand. "And what can I do? I am no mage or keeper of stories." "You are a seeker," Lirien said, stepping closer. "And this garden has chosen you. Its heart lies ahead, where the oldest and most fragile story blooms. If you wish to save it, you must face what it holds." Her words struck Elric with a weight he did not fully understand, but he nodded, his resolve hardening. Then take me there. Lirien smiled faintly, though her expression remained shadowed by something unspoken. Come then, but be warned. What you find may not be what you expect. They walked in silence, the paths growing narrower, the air thicker with the hum of unseen energy. The flowers here were fewer but more vibrant, their light burning with a fierce intensity. Elric felt their whispers pressing against his mind, fragments of forgotten loves brushing against his thoughts like ghostly fingers. Finally, they reached a clearing at the heart of the garden. In its center stood a single flower, its petals blackened and brittle, as if scorched by some unseen fire. It exuded no light, no hum, only a silence that seemed to swallow everything around it. Elric hesitated, his instinct screaming at him to turn away. But Lirien's voice cut through his fear, steady and quiet. This is the garden's oldest story, she said. It is the root from which all others grow, and it is dying. If it fades, so too will the rest. What must I do? Elric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lirien looked at him, her expression unreadable. Touch it. Only then will the story reveal itself. The prince's hand trembled as he reached for the flower. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a cold like nothing he had ever known coursed through him. His vision blurred, and the world around him dissolved into darkness. Then, in the void, a voice spoke, a voice he recognized as his own. Remember, it said, a command and a plea entwined. And Elric fell into the heart of the story, his mind unraveling as it revealed truths he had long forgotten. The garden around him seemed to hold its breath, its fate bound to the prince's courage. The darkness enveloped Elric as the world of the garden dissolved, leaving him suspended in a void where neither time nor place existed. It was not an emptiness, but a fullness, a space saturated with whispers too faint to discern, yet too numerous to ignore. Then, like a single flame piercing the night, a memory unfolded before him, vivid and unyielding. He stood within a great hall of polished stone, its high ceilings adorned with banners of deep crimson and gold. The air hummed with tension, and Elric realized this was not his memory, yet it felt like his. A figure moved across the hall, a woman clad in a gown of midnight blue, her face half hidden by a veil. Her steps were deliberate, her movements graceful, yet sorrow clung to her like mist. She approached the man, his features indistinct but his presence commanding. Between them passed no words, only a single gesture. The woman held out her hand, offering a flower with petals the color of twilight. The image dissolved as quickly as it had come, leaving Elric breathless. But before he could gather his thoughts, another vision took shape. This one was sharper, more familiar. He stood in a garden much like the one he had just left, But the flowers were brighter, their whispers louder. A girl with laughing eyes and hair like sunlight stood before him, holding out a single bloom. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight that anchored the moment in his mind. "Promise me you won't forget," she said, her tone caught between hope and fear. Elric opened his mouth to respond, but the scene shifted violently, the colours bleeding into one another until they vanished. The void returned, and with it the voice he had heard before, his own, yet not his. "Do you remember now?" it asked, its tone filled with an aching familiarity. "I don't understand," Elric said, his voice echoing into the emptiness. "What are these memories? Are they mine?" The voice did not answer directly. Instead, the void began to take shape again, this time forming not a memory, but a space. Elric found himself standing in the heart of the garden once more, yet it was different now. The flowers around him glowed brighter, their whispers clearer, and the air was charged with an energy that made his skin tingle. Lirien stood nearby, her expression unreadable. "You have seen the garden's heart," she said. "Do you understand its purpose now?" Elric looked at the withered flower before him, its blackened petals trembling faintly as if stirred by an unseen breeze. The visions had left a mark on him, a sensation of loss so profound it threatened to pull him under. "The garden preserves the stories of forgotten loves," he said slowly, the words tasting unfamiliar yet true. "But some stories, they're mine." Lirien inclined her head, a shadow passing over her face. "Yes," she said. "This garden does not merely hold the world's stories, it reflects them. It shows each seeker the truths they have buried, the loves they have abandoned, the promises they have broken." Elric felt his breath catch, the weight of her words settling over him like a shroud. "But why me? Why show me these things?" "Because the garden chose you," Lirien said. "It saw in you a heart that still carries the spark of remembrance. To save this place, you must rekindle the light within yourself. Only then can the magic of the forgotten petals return." Elric's gaze returned to the withered flower. Its silence was deafening, a void amidst the hum of the garden. "What do I have to do?" "Touch it again," Lirien said softly. "But this time, do not resist what it shows you. Accept the pain, the loss, and the love. Only then can the story heal, and the garden's magic be restored." Elric hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached out. The memory of the girl in the vision lingered in his mind. Her laughter, her words, her hope. As his fingers brushed the brittle petals, the void returned, but this time he did not fight it. The whispers rose around him, no longer faint but a symphony of voices. He saw her again, the girl with the laughing eyes, and this time he remembered her name. He remembered the way she had danced among the flowers, the promises they had made. And the moment he had turned away, consumed by duty and fear. The pain was sharp and unrelenting, but Elric held on to it, letting it wash over him. The whispers grew louder, their melody weaving together into a single, resonant note. The darkness began to recede, and the garden's light returned, brighter than before. When Elric opened his eyes, the withered flower was gone. In its place stood a single bloom, its petals glowing with a light that seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat. The garden around him had changed, its whispers clearer, its colours more vibrant. Lirien stepped forward, her gaze steady. "You have done what few could," she said. "You have remembered, and in doing so, you have begun to heal the garden." Elric's voice was quiet but steady. "What happens now?" Lirien's smile was soft but bittersweet. "Now you must carry this light back to the world, for the garden's magic does not belong here alone. It was meant to bloom everywhere. But first, there is one final truth you must face." And with those words, she turned, leading him deeper into the garden, where the petals whispered of a truth yet to be revealed. Elric followed Lirien into the heart of the garden, where the whispers grew louder, their cadence a symphony of love and loss. The air shimmered as though reality itself wavered at the edges, and the path ahead seemed both endless and immediate. The flowers here were radiant, their petals glowing with an intensity that bordered on the otherworldly. Yet even amidst this brilliance, Elric felt a deep unease, a sense that he was approaching something far greater than himself. Lirien led him to a clearing, its center marked by a pool of still, glass-like water. Around it bloomed flowers of every conceivable hue, their reflections painting the surface with a kaleidoscope of light. Above, the sky was neither day nor night, a vast expanse of shifting stars and shadows. At the water's edge stood a pedestal, its surface etched with symbols Elric could not decipher. "This is the garden's heart," Lirien said, her voice quiet yet resonant. "It is where the stories converge, where the threads of love and memory weave the fabric of this place. To restore the garden's magic, you must offer something of yourself, a truth you have long kept hidden, even from your own heart." Elric stared at the pedestal, its presence both inviting and foreboding. "A truth?" he asked, his voice low. "What truth could I hold that is worth so much?" "The garden does not measure worth as the world does," Lirien replied. "It seeks only what is genuine, what is freely given. Your memories, your pain, your joy, they are the threads it needs to mend what has been broken." Elric hesitated, the weight of her words pressing heavily upon him. He thought of the visions he had seen, the girl with the laughing eyes, the promises they had made, the moments he had turned away. The memory was sharp now, no longer veiled by the haze of time, and it cut through him like a blade. "I loved her," he said finally, his voice trembling. But I left her. I told myself it was for the kingdom, for duty. But the truth is I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean to hold on to something so fragile, so fleeting. Lirien's gaze softened. Her iridescent eyes filled with a quiet understanding. And now? Elric closed his eyes, the image of the girl filling his mind. Now, I remember. I remember the joy, the sorrow, the hope. I remember the love I tried to forget, and I know it was never truly gone. It was here, in the garden, waiting for me to find it again. Lirien stepped aside, gesturing toward the pedestal. Then offer it. Let the garden carry your truth, and through it, restore its light. Elric approached the pedestal, his steps slow and deliberate. As he placed his hands upon its surface, the symbols beneath his fingers began to glow, their light spreading outward like ripples on the water. The air around him thickened, and he felt the weight of the garden's magic pressing against him, demanding, yet patient. He closed his eyes and spoke, his words not for Lirien, not for himself, but for the garden. I loved her, he said again, his voice steady now. I loved her, and I lost her, but even in losing her, I carried her with me. I see that now. She was never truly gone, just as the stories here are never truly forgotten. They live, as long as someone remembers. As his words faded, the garden responded. The pool before him began to glow, its surface rippling with light that rose into the air, weaving itself into the flowers. The whispers grew louder, their tones no longer mournful but triumphant. A chorus of stories rekindled. The withered blooms scattered throughout the garden unfurled, their colours vibrant once more, their light illuminating the grove in a radiant glow. Elric stepped back, his breath caught in his throat as the garden transformed around him. The air was alive with magic, the very ground beneath him thrumming with a pulse that matched his own. He turned to Lirien, whose form now seemed even more luminous, her wings shimmering with an intensity that rivaled the stars. You have done what the garden needed, she said, her voice filled with quiet reverence. Its magic is restored, and its stories will endure. But this is not the end, Elric. The garden's light must not remain hidden. It must return to the world. Elric nodded, the truth of her words resonating within him. How? Lirien extended her hand, and in it appeared a single petal, its glow soft yet unyielding. Carry this, she said. It is a fragment of the garden's heart, a token of its magic. Through it, you will remember, and in remembering, you will bring its light to others. Elric took the petal, its warmth seeping into his skin. The garden around him began to fade, its light growing distant but not dim. As the grove dissolved into mist, Lirien's voice lingered, a whisper carried on the wind. Remember, Prince. Remember, and let the world bloom once more. When Elric opened his eyes, he was standing at the edge of the forest, the palace silhouetted against the dawn. The petal rested in his hand, its glow faint but steady, a reminder of the truths he had uncovered. He turned toward the rising sun, his heart lighter, his purpose clear. The garden's magic was not a relic to be kept, it was a gift to be shared. And with each step he took, Elric carried its light into the world, a promise of love remembered and life renewed.